Hey guys, tonight we are going to travel to a place shrouded in mystery, to the silent ruins of a magnificent lost city in the heart of southern Africa. For centuries, its vast stone walls stood empty, its purpose and the story of its builders a profound enigma. This was the capital of a great medieval trading empire, a center of wealth and power that was once as famous in its own world as Rome or Constantinople. We are going to visit Great Zimbabwe. Frankly, it's a story that for a long time many people in the wider world refused to believe. A magnificent stone city, the largest in all of sub-Saharan Africa, built centuries ago by a native African civilization. We are going to gently walk through its silent, sun-warmed ruins and try to piece together the quiet story of its rise and its mysterious fall to so. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always a huge encouragement. For those of you already settled in, I'd love to see where and when you're listening from. Go ahead and drop your city and local time in the comments. I'm recording this in the very quiet hours of the early morning, just after 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, here in the United States. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gentle whir of the fan fades away. In its place, you hear the sound of a soft, warm wind blowing across a vast, open grassland, the African savanna. The air is dry and smells of sun-baked earth and sweet grass. You are on the high plateau of the country that now bears the city's name, Zimbabwe. The landscape is a beautiful rolling expanse, dotted with distinctive, smooth granite hills or koppies that rise from the plains like ancient, sleeping creatures. And there, nestled in a quiet valley between these hills, you see it. It is not a single towering pyramid. It is a sprawling, silent city of stone. This is Great Zimbabwe. You are walking through a ghost city. A city that, at its peak in the 14th century, was home to nearly 20,000 people. It was a bustling capital, the center of a vast trading network that stretched from the heart of Africa to the shores of China. But the people who lived here left behind no written records. Their language, their stories, their history, all of it has vanished, carried away on the wind. The stones themselves are the only history book we have, and they speak only in whispers. The first thing that strikes you is the sheer, simple beauty of the construction. The walls are made from the local granite, a stone that naturally breaks into neat, brick-like blocks. And these blocks have been laid together with incredible precision and skill, without the use of any mortar to bind them. This is the art of dry stone walling, and the people who built this city were absolute masters of it. The very name of this place, and of the modern country, is a testament to its power. Zimbabwe is a word from the language of the Shona people, the descendants of the city's builders. It means great houses of stone, or venerated houses. It is a city that literally named a nation, a place of such profound cultural significance that its memory became the foundation for a modern African identity. For centuries, the very existence of this magnificent city was a source of intense and often bitter debate. Early European hunters and explorers who stumbled upon the ruins in the 19th century, viewing the world through the narrow lens of their own racial prejudice, simply refused to believe that indigenous Africans could have created such a sophisticated and massive structure. They invented fantastical theories, attributing the city's construction to ancient Phoenicians, to the Egyptians, or even to the legendary Queen of Sheba. The silence of these stones is a patient silence. They have listened to the songs of the Shona kings and later, to the loud, confident, and completely wrong-headed arguments of the colonists. The stones have outlasted them all, and they are still here to tell their true, quiet story. You walk towards the largest and most famous part of the ancient city. It is a vast, circular structure whose purpose is still a mystery. Its massive, curving walls rise before you, a silent testament to the power of the forgotten kingdom that built it. This is the Great Enclosure. You approach the largest of the ruins, the structure known simply and accurately as the Great Enclosure. Its outer wall is a magnificent, sweeping, an almost organic curve of stone. It is not a perfect circle, but a beautiful, slightly irregular ellipse. You walk alongside it, your hand trailing on the cool, rough texture of the granite, and you feel dwarfed by its immense scale. The wall is over 30 feet high in places, and nearly 800 feet in circumference. It is built from almost 1,000,000 individual granite blocks, each one quarried and shaped by hand. And as you look closer, you are struck again by the defining marvel of this place. It is built entirely without mortar. The stones are not held together by any kind of cement or clay. They are simply, perfectly, and expertly cut and balanced, one on top of the other, their immense weight and the skill of their placement the only things that have held them together for over 700 years. The craftsmanship is breathtaking. The courses of stone are laid with a beautiful, almost hypnotic, regularity. Near the top of the wall, you can see a delicate, decorative chevron pattern that runs for hundreds of feet, a simple but elegant piece of artistry, a flourish of pride from the ancient masons. This was not a castle built for war. It was a palace built to inspire awe. Archaeologists are in wide agreement that the great enclosure was not a military fortress. The walls are not designed for defense. There are no battlements, no arrow slits, no fortified gatehouses. This great curving wall was designed not to keep an invading army out, but to create a private, exclusive, and sacred space within. It was a wall of status, a symbol of royal power, separating the world of the king and his court from the world of the common people. You step through one of the narrow, unadorned entrances. The world inside is a labyrinth of other, smaller stone walls, creating a series of enclosures and courtyards. Within these spaces, archaeologists have found the remains of numerous circular huts, made of daga, a mixture of clay and gravel, which would have been topped with thatched roofs. It is easy to see only the stone. But you must imagine the life that once filled these spaces. The great stone walls were just the bones of the city. The real life of the court, the sleeping, the cooking, the ceremonies, would have taken place in these daga huts, which have now long since melted back into the earth, leaving only their stone foundations behind. You walk through the quiet, grassy enclosures until you come to one of the site's most famous and enigmatic features, the parallel passage. It is a long, narrow, and winding corridor that runs for nearly 200 feet between the massive outer wall and a second inner wall. The passage is so narrow that you can stretch out your arms and almost touch both walls at once. Its purpose is a complete mystery. As you walk through it, you notice that the acoustics are remarkable. A soft whisper seems to carry from one end to the other. It feels like a secret ceremonial pathway, a place designed for a solemn private procession, leading to the most sacred part of the enclosure. The primary debate among archaeologists concerning the great enclosure is its precise function. Was it the primary residence of the king and his court? Was it a ceremonial center, used for the initiation rituals of the young men and women of the tribe? Or was it, as some have suggested, a private compound for the king's many wives, a royal harem protected from the eyes of the common world? The silent stones do not give up their secrets easily. This great structure was the political and residential heart of the city in its later stages. But it was not the original center of power. As you stand in the middle of the enclosure, you look up to the north, and you see a great high granite hill, a natural fortress that overlooks the entire valley. And crowning the very top of that hill, integrated into the natural chaos of its giant boulders, are even older and even more complex stone ruins. That, you understand, was the first city, the home of the first kings, and the dwelling place of the spirits. That is the hill complex. You leave the grand, curving walls of the great enclosure behind and begin the climb up the ancient, worn stone path that leads to the hill complex. This is a journey to an even older, more sacred, and more strategically powerful part of the ancient city. The path is steep and narrow, winding its way up and through a dramatic, almost chaotic jumble of massive natural granite boulders. Some of these boulders are as large as houses, their surfaces smoothed and shaped by millions of years of wind and rain. The builders of this city did not see these great stones as obstacles. They saw them as opportunities. As you climb higher, you see how they built their world. The dry stone walls of the hill complex are not built in a neat, open space like the great enclosure. They are woven into the very fabric of the mountain itself. Walls rise up from the tops of giant boulders. Narrow, secret passages are formed by the small gaps between two colossal stones, which have been walled off at either end. The entire complex is a magnificent organic fusion of human architecture and natural geology. This is the oldest part of Great Zimbabwe, with the first stone walls being built here as early as the 11th century. It is believed that this was the original royal residence, the home of the first kings. If the great enclosure below was the kingdom's political and administrative center in its later years, then this hill complex was its Westminster Abbey, or its Vatican City, the spiritual, sacred, and unchanging heart of the entire nation. You finally reach the summit. The view is breathtaking. From this high vantage point, you have a complete, panoramic view of the entire valley. You can see the full, magnificent sweep of the great enclosure below, and the ruins of the many smaller dwellings that made up the city in the valley. This was a place of immense power. From here, a king could look out and survey his entire capital city, and the rolling grasslands of his kingdom beyond. The complex on the hill is a maze of passages and enclosures. Archaeologists believe that one area was the residence of the king, another was for his royal court, and another was a public gathering space. But the most important of all is the eastern enclosure. This is believed to have been the most sacred ritual site in the entire city. It was here, in this enclosure, that the famous and enigmatic soapstone bird carvings, the Zimbabwe birds, were found. This may have been the place where the king would communicate with the spirits of the royal ancestors, the guardians of the nation. You can imagine the king, or the chief priest, standing here at dawn, the first rays of the sun striking this high peak. He would look out over his sleeping kingdom below. This was a place designed to make you feel powerful, but also to make you feel connected to the spirits of the ancestors and the gods of the sky. It was a place of both earthly and heavenly authority. Scholars still debate the precise relationship between the hill complex and the great enclosure below. When a later king decided to build a new, larger, and more magnificent royal residence in the valley, did the hill complex lose its political importance and become a purely religious and ceremonial site? Or did the king maintain two residences, a domestic and political one below, and a sacred, ritualistic one up here on the hill, moving between the two worlds as the ceremonial calendar demanded? The silence you hear now is a modern invention. In its day, this hill would have been alive with sound. The sound of drums echoing across the valley, the sound of priests chanting, the smell of smoke from sacred fires. The silence is just the empty space where all those old, powerful sounds used to be. From your high vantage point, your eye is drawn back to the great enclosure below. You can see its entire magnificent shape, and from here, you can clearly see the most mysterious and debated structure in the entire city, rising from within the great curving walls. It is a solid, perfectly shaped, and utterly enigmatic structure. It is the conical tower. Your journey must now take you back down the hill to look more closely at this strange and silent monument. You descend from the high, windy openness of the hill complex and re-enter the quiet, enclosed world of the great enclosure. You make your way through the maze of inner walls, following the long, narrow parallel passage to its end. And there, in what is clearly the most protected and sacred part of the royal compound, you stand before the most mysterious structure in all of Great Zimbabwe. The conical tower. It is a thing of strange and simple beauty. It is a solid, circular, and perfectly shaped cone of stone, rising to a height of over 30 feet. It is built with the same incredible, mortarless craftsmanship as the great walls that surround it, its courses of granite blocks laid with a flawless precision, but the most enigmatic thing about it is its solidity. It is not a hollow watchtower. It is not a defensive turret. It has no doors, no windows, no staircases. There is no way to get inside it because there is no inside to get into. It is a pure, solid sculptural form, a silent monument of stone. Its true purpose is the greatest and most enduring mystery of Great Zimbabwe, a subject of intense debate and speculation for centuries. It is a beautiful, silent, and deeply frustrating object. It is clearly the focal point of this entire enclosure, and it absolutely refuses to tell you what it is. It is a stone question mark, sitting in the heart of a great stone city. The most widely accepted theory among archaeologists is that the tower is a symbolic representation of a grain bin. In the agricultural society of the Shona people, the king or chief was the custodian of the community's surplus grain. A full and overflowing grain bin was, therefore, the ultimate symbol of a good harvest, of royal generosity, and of the king's ability to provide for his people during times of drought or famine. The tower, in this interpretation, is a massive, permanent, and stone-built symbol of the king's wealth, power, and his sacred duty as the great provider. Other theories suggest it may be a phallic symbol, representing the masculine power and virility of the king, and the fertility of the nation he ruled. Still others have suggested it may have had an astronomical purpose, though there is little evidence to support this. The primary debate among archaeologists has always been between these symbolic interpretations. Is it a symbol of the king's economic power, the great granary? Or is it a symbol of his ancestral and spiritual power, the great phallus? Without any written records or any direct oral traditions that remember the tower's original meaning, the debate relies entirely on interpreting the structure through the lens of wider Shona cultural symbolism. You can see that the very top of the tower was once decorated with a beautiful, encircling pattern of upright stones, adding to its prestige and importance. It was not just a big stone cone. It was a decorated, highly significant, and very deliberately constructed big stone cone. The people who built this knew exactly what it meant. The quiet tragedy is that they were the only ones, and they never wrote it down for us. Whatever its specific literal meaning, its broader purpose seems clear. It was a symbol of the center. It was the heart of the royal enclosure, which was the heart of the city, which was the heart of the entire kingdom. It was a solid, permanent, and unmoving stone anchor in a world of seasons and change. You can imagine the great ceremonies that must have taken place in the shadow of this tower, the king and his priests making offerings at its base, the royal court gathered in this most sacred of spaces. You have now explored the great silent city of stone as it exists today, a magnificent and mysterious ruin. You have seen the great walls, the high hill, and the enigmatic tower. But this city was not built for its own sake. It was the capital of a vast and wealthy trading empire, and that empire was built on a foundation of a single, precious, and glittering substance. To truly understand Great Zimbabwe, we must understand the source of its wealth, and for that we must leave the quiet, sun-drenched ruins of the present day and travel back in time. We must travel back to the 14th century to see the city in its glorious prime, and to visit the dark, dangerous, and deep places from which its power flowed. The silent, sun-drenched ruins of the 21st century dissolve. The world shifts and you find yourself in the same landscape, but it is no longer empty. The air is filled with the sounds of a living community, the smoke from cooking fires, the voices of people. It is the 14th century, the golden age of the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, and you are on the high plateau, in search of the source of the kingdom's power. You are in search of gold. The wealth of Great Zimbabwe did not come from one single massive mine. It was the collective product of thousands of small scattered mines, dotted all across the vast granite shield of the Zimbabwean plateau. You are approaching one of these small workings now. Imagine you are watching a Shona miner. He is a strong, skilled man, his body lean and wiry from a life of hard physical labor. His work is not in a vast, open-pit mine, but in a narrow, deep, and terrifyingly small vertical shaft that disappears into the earth. These ancient mines were marvels of ingenuity and courage. The miners would identify a gold-bearing quartz reef on the surface, and they would follow it deep into the ground, digging their narrow shafts over 100 feet down into the solid granite. The work was incredibly dangerous. The shafts were dark, hot, and poorly ventilated, and the risk of a tunnel collapse or a sudden flood was a constant daily threat. The method for breaking the hard rock was a slow and patient one. It was called fire setting. The miner would first haul a load of dry firewood down into the bottom of the narrow shaft. There, in the cramped darkness, he would build a great roaring fire against the rock face of the quartz reef. He would keep the fire burning for hours until the rock was superheated. Then came the most dangerous part. He would throw cold water onto the glowing rock face. The sudden violent change in temperature would cause the rock to crack and splinter. He would then descend again into the steam-filled shaft and, with a simple iron chisel and a heavy stone hammer, he would painstakingly chip away at the fractured, gold-bearing quartz. It was a slow, hot, and incredibly dangerous way to make the king rich. The miner himself would have seen very little of the ultimate international value of the glittering dust he was freeing from the stone. The chunks of quartz ore are then hauled to the surface in tough leather bags. But the work is not yet done. On the surface, another part of the process begins, a task often undertaken by the women of the village. You watch as they take the heavy, grayish chunks of ore and, using large grinding stones, they crush it into a fine, sandy powder. Then they take this powder to a nearby stream. Using a simple wooden bowl, they begin the patient, skillful process of panning. They scoop up the powder, add water, and swirl the bowl with a gentle, practiced motion. The lighter, worthless stone dust is washed away over the edge of the bowl, while the much heavier, precious flecks of gold sink to the bottom. After many hours of this work, what is left in the bottom of the bowl is a small, glittering pile of pure gold dust. It is a perfect partnership of labor. The men perform the dangerous work of extraction, deep in the darkness of the earth. The women perform the patient, skillful work of purification, in the bright sunlight. Historians and archaeologists debate the precise social organization of this vast mining industry. Was it a state-controlled enterprise, with royal officials overseeing the mines and collecting all the gold as a tax or a tribute? Or was it a more decentralized system, where local chiefs and communities controlled their own mines, and then traded the gold as a valuable commodity to the great merchants of the capital city, Great Zimbabwe? You look at the small pile of glittering dust, shining in the palm of a woman's hand. It does not look like much. But this is the fuel of the empire. This dust will pay for the building of the great stone walls. It will be traded for the fine porcelain from China and the beautiful glass beads from India. It is the beginning of a story that will stretch from this small, quiet village to the far corners of the known world. But gold was not the only great treasure to come from the high plateau. Another, even more exotic and highly prized material was harvested from the greatest and most majestic of the creatures of the savannah. The glitter of gold dust fades from your mind's eye. We leave the dark, narrow mineshaft and step out into the vast, open grasslands of the Zimbabwean plateau. For there was another treasure here, one that was not hidden deep within the earth, but that walked upon it, a living, breathing mountain of flesh and bone. The second great source of the kingdom's wealth was the elephant. Imagine you are now with a small party of Shona hunters. These are not ordinary men. They are specialists, masters of the bush. Their skills passed down through generations. They are tracking a great bull elephant, following its dinner plate-sized footprints through the tall, golden grass of the savannah. In the medieval world, ivory was a substance of immense value and prestige. It was a luxury good, prized in the great markets of Europe, the Middle East, India, and especially in imperial China. It was carved by master artisans into intricate objects of art, beautiful religious icons, and luxury items for the wealthy. Chess pieces, ornate jewelry boxes, the handles of daggers and swords. African ivory, from the great tusks of the savanna elephant, was larger, softer, and easier to carve than the ivory from its Asian cousin, and was therefore the most highly prized of all. The hunt is a slow, patient, and deeply respectful affair. The hunters move with a silence and a grace that seems almost supernatural, reading the subtle signs of the landscape, a broken branch, a patch of flattened grass, that tell the story of the elephant's passing. This is not a sport. It is a sacred and extremely dangerous business. The hunters show a profound respect for the great animal they are pursuing. They might say a quiet prayer to the spirit of the elephant, acknowledging its immense power and wisdom, and thanking it in advance for the great gift of its life, a gift that will bring wealth and prestige to their entire community. The ivory trade was a major component of the economies of several great medieval African states, including the Kingdom of Zimbabwe. The immense and insatiable demand for this white gold, from the merchants of the Indian Ocean trade network, fueled a sophisticated hunting and trading system that stretched deep into the African interior. After days of tracking, they find him, a great bull elephant, his magnificent curved creamy white tusks gleaming in the sun. The hunt itself is a swift, courageous, and highly skilled act, a moment of intense and dangerous focus. Afterwards, nothing is wasted. The great precious tusks are carefully and expertly removed, but the rest of the animal is a massive bounty for the hunter's entire village. The meat will provide a great feast that will last for weeks. The thick, tough hide will be used to make immense war shields, sandals, and belts, and the sinews can be used for making powerful bowstrings. The tusk is the part that will travel thousands of miles and be traded for porcelain and silk. But here, in the village, the rest of the animal is just as valuable. It is a direct and tangible blessing that will feed and clothe the entire community. Archaeologists and environmental historians still debate the long-term impact of this medieval ivory trade on the elephant populations of southern Africa. Was the level of hunting sustainable, a small-scale enterprise that had little effect on the vast herds? Or did the immense demand from the faraway markets lead to a significant decline in the elephant population in the regions around Great Zimbabwe, perhaps contributing to the eventual ecological strain that would weaken the kingdom? You look at the two great sources of wealth that this land provides. One, the gold, requires men to descend into the darkness of the earth, to chip away at the hard rock in a slow, patient, and dangerous labor. The other, the ivory, requires them to walk in the bright sun and to face the largest and most powerful of all the beasts that walk upon the earth. Both are won through great skill, great courage, and great patience, and now these two precious commodities, the small, heavy bags of glittering gold dust and the huge, heavy, curving ivory tusks, are ready for the next stage of their journey. They are the raw materials of the empire's wealth, and this wealth all flowed to one place. The great capital city, the center of the kingdom's power, where the king resided and thousands of his people lived. It is time now to visit Great Zimbabwe in its 14th century prime. The gold from the mines and the ivory from the great elephant hunt now begin their journey to the capital. We follow them, and as we arrive, the silent, sun-drenched ruins of the 21st century dissolve, replaced by a bustling, vibrant, and powerful metropolis. It is the 14th century, and you are now walking through the living city of Great Zimbabwe at the absolute height of its power. The great stone enclosures, the hill complex, and the great enclosure are the heart of the city, the domain of the king and the ruling elite. But the city itself is much, much larger than just these stone walls. The valley floor all around the stone monuments is filled with a sprawling, lively settlement of thousands of circular, clay and thatch houses, the daga huts of the common people. This is where the real daily life of the empire happens. The air is filled with the sounds of a thriving city. The lowing of cattle, the bleating of goats, the sound of children laughing, and the constant rhythmic percussive sound of women pounding millet and sorghum into flour. The air smells of the wood smoke from 1,000 cooking fires. At its peak, Great Zimbabwe was a major urban center, home to an estimated 18,000 people. Its society was a complex and hierarchical one. The farmers, the cattle herders, the potters, the weavers, and the blacksmiths, the great majority of the population, lived here in the bustling valley, while the king, his court, and the high priests likely lived their more remote and sacred lives within the protection of the great stone walls. You walk through the city. You see craftsmen at work. You see women, their hands skilled and patient, forming beautiful round-bottomed pots from the local clay, which they then burnish with graphite to give them a beautiful dark metallic sheen. You see blacksmiths, their muscles gleaming with sweat, working the bellows of their forge, the loud ringing clang of their hammers on hot iron, a constant, rhythmic beat in the city's soundtrack. They are forging the iron hoes needed to farm the land, and the sharp spearheads needed to hunt and to defend the kingdom. This is the engine room of the empire. The gold and the ivory provide the great wealth for international trade, but the real daily life of the city is here, in the work of the farmer, the potter, and the blacksmith. The foundation of this great city was its cattle. For the Shona people, cattle were the primary and most important symbol of wealth and status. The king and the nobles owned vast herds that grazed on the surrounding savanna. The number of cattle a man owned determined his place in society. While the wider world knew of Great Zimbabwe for its gold, its own people likely measured its true wealth in the size and health of its cattle herds. Archaeologists who have excavated the site have found vast quantities of cattle bones, especially within the great enclosure, suggesting that the elites enjoyed a diet rich in beef, a sign of their high status. There is a scholarly debate about the precise economic relationship between the elites in the Stone City and the commoners in the valley. Was it a kind of feudal system, where the commoners were serfs who owed their labor and a portion of all their crops to the king? Or was it a more complex relationship, where the king provided spiritual guidance and military protection in exchange for regular tribute, but the common people were largely free to manage their own farms and their own economic lives? You can imagine the scene on a great market day. People from all the surrounding villages would have come to the capital to trade their surplus grain for a new, beautifully made clay pot, or for a strong new iron hoe from one of the city's master blacksmiths. It is a scene of life, of connection, of community, that is the same in every great city, in every corner of the world, throughout all of history. And into this market come the most precious commodities of all. You see a group of men who have come from the gold fields. They're small, but incredibly heavy leather bags filled with glittering gold dust. You see another group who have come from the hunting grounds, carrying the huge, curving, creamy white tusks of an elephant. But these precious goods do not stay in the city for long. They are the kingdom's connection to the outside world. And they are about to begin a much longer, much more difficult, and much more profitable journey. It is time to join the great caravan to the coast. The great city of Zimbabwe, with its bustling markets and its magnificent silent stone walls, is now behind you. You have joined a trade caravan. But this is not the kind of caravan you might imagine from the stories of the Sahara, with its long lines of swaying camels. Here, in the terrain of southern Africa, often made impassable for pack animals by the presence of the deadly tsetse fly, the journey was made on foot. You are part of a long, snaking line of men, a human river flowing from the heart of the continent towards the distant coast of the Indian Ocean. These are the porters, the strong, lean, and experienced men who were the lifeblood of the empire's long-distance trade. Each man carries a heavy load. Some are balanced on their heads. Others are strapped to their backs. Some men are carrying the precious, heavy elephant tusks. And others, the most trusted of the group, are carrying the small, but incredibly dense, leather bags of pure gold dust. This is the part of the story that is often forgotten. We think of the gold in the mines and the rich merchants in the coastal cities, but we forget the immense human effort that connected them. Every single ounce of gold, every single pound of ivory, had to be carried on the back and on the shoulders of a man, on a long, slow, and dangerous walk to the sea. The journey is a formidable one. The main trade route from Great Zimbabwe to the coast was a network of footpaths that likely followed the course of the Great Save River, a journey of over 250 miles to the Swahili port city of Sofala, on the coast of modern-day Mozambique. It was a journey that would have taken many weeks. Imagine you are walking with them. The days are hot, and the work is monotonous. The only sound is the rhythmic scuff of dozens of bare feet on the dusty path. the quiet, low chatter of the men in the Shona language, and the constant, buzzing symphony of the African bush. You descend from the high, dry grasslands of the Zimbabwean plateau, a land of open savanna and granite hills. The path takes you down into lower, warmer river valleys, through dense forests and across smaller tributary rivers. The journey is not without its dangers. There is the threat of wild animals, lions, leopards, and of course other elephants. And there is the threat of other men. The route passes through the territories of many different, smaller chiefdoms, and a caravan laden with such immense wealth was a tempting target. The caravan leaders would have had to be skilled diplomats as well as expert guides, knowing which local chiefs required a gift or a toll to be paid for safe passage, and which were to be avoided entirely. Some of the earliest Portuguese accounts of this region describe a form of silent trade that would sometimes take place, a ritualized system where the inland traders and the coastal merchants, who did not share a language or a culture, could conduct business without speaking, leaving their goods in a designated spot to be exchanged. Archaeologists still debate the exact nature of this overland trade. Was it a highly organized, state-controlled system, with great caravans dispatched directly by the king of Zimbabwe himself? Or was it a more organic, down-the-line trade, where the gold and ivory were passed from one village and one chiefdom to the next, slowly making their way to the coast, with each middleman in the chain taking a small portion of the profit along the way? As you travel eastward for many days, the world begins to change. The air, which was dry on the high plateau, becomes thick and heavy with humidity. The vegetation changes, becoming lusher, more tropical. And then one day you smell something new on the wind, a sharp, clean and salty scent you have never experienced before. It is the smell of the ocean. For a man born and raised deep in the heart of the great African continent, this smell must have been an incredible and almost magical experience. It is the smell of the end of the known world, and the beginning of a new one, and then finally you arrive. You emerge from the thick coastal forest, and you see it for the first time. A vast, glittering, and seemingly endless expanse of brilliant blue water, stretching to the horizon, the Indian Ocean. And nestled in a bay on the edge of this great ocean is a bustling port city, a place of tall stone houses, strange triangular sailed ships, and people with faces and clothes from a dozen different lands. You have arrived at Sofala. The long walk is over. You step out of the deep green of the coastal forest and into the bright, sun-drenched, and chaotic world of the port city of Sofala. It is a world utterly different from the quiet inland villages and the great stone capital you have left behind on the high plateau. The air here is thick, warm, and heavy with the sharp, clean scent of salt in the sea. The architecture is completely alien. Instead of the familiar circular daga huts of your home, you are surrounded by tall, square, multi-storied houses built from blocks of coral stone, with flat roofs and beautiful, intricately carved wooden doors and window frames. The streets are narrow, winding, and unpaved, filled with a teeming multicultural crowd. This is a city that looks outward, not inward. Its face is turned to the sea, to the great, ancient, and interconnected world of the Indian Ocean. It is a place of constant arrivals and departures, a gateway between the deep green heart of Africa and the rest of the known world. The people here are a vibrant mixture. You see the strong, lean porters of your caravan from the interior. Their faces a mixture of weariness and awe, but they are now mingling with the local Swahili merchants, who are dressed in fine, colorful robes of imported cotton and silk. You hear the guttural sounds of Arabic spoken by sailors from their dhows in the harbor, and the lilting tones of merchants from Persia and India. This is a true melting pot, a crossroads of civilization. Sofala in the 14th century was one of the great city-states of the Swahili coast, a string of independent, prosperous, and sophisticated trading ports that dotted the coastline of East Africa. And Sofala's great wealth, its entire reason for being, came from its unique position as the primary international seaport for the gold and ivory of the great kingdom in the interior. Your kingdom, the Kingdom of Zimbabwe. The Swahili culture that dominated this coast was a unique and beautiful blend. It was born from centuries of trade and intermarriage between the indigenous Bantu-speaking peoples of the African coast and the Arab and Persian traders who came and settled, brought by the predictable seasonal monsoon winds. The very name Swahili comes from an Arabic word, sal, which simply means coasts. They were the people of the coasts. Their language, Kiswahili, is a Bantu language, but its vocabulary is rich with words borrowed from Arabic. The city feels like a hinge between two different worlds. The men you walked with from the interior represent the deep, ancient, continental world of Africa. The merchants you see here represent the cosmopolitan, interconnected, maritime world of the Indian Ocean. And here, in this noisy, bustling port, those two worlds meet to do business. Historians still debate the precise nature of the political relationship between the great inland empire of Zimbabwe and these coastal city-states. Was Great Zimbabwe a powerful, land-based overlord that controlled the ports as part of its empire? Or were the Swahili city-states like Sofala independent maritime powers, who had a more balanced, symbiotic, and mutually profitable trading partnership with the great kingdom of the interior? For the porters of your caravan, the long walk is over. Their job was to bring the precious gold dust and the heavy ivory tusks here, to this city by the sea. They will now trade their cargo with the wealthy Swahili merchants. They will trade the wealth of the land for the wealth of the sea and the world beyond it. They will return home not just with goods like fine cloth from India, salt from the sea, and beautiful glazed pottery from Persia, but with stories of this strange and wonderful world, of the great endless ocean and the tall ships with their triangular sails. The gold and the ivory are now in new hands. The first great chapter of their journey is complete. They have been won from the earth and from the wild, and they have been carried to the coast. Now they will be stored in the great cool stone warehouses of the Swahili merchants, waiting for the next monsoon wind, and the next stage of their long silent journey to the east. The porters from the interior have been paid in cloth and salt and beads, and they have begun their long, slow walk back home to the high plateau. The gold dust and the ivory tusks now belong to a different kind of man, a man of the city and of the sea. Let us step into the cool, dark, and fragrant world of a wealthy Swahili merchant in the port of Sofala. Imagine you are in his trading house. It is a tall, impressive stone building, a world away from the clay and thatch huts of the interior. The air inside is cool, and it smells of exotic spices, of fragrant sandalwood, and of the salt from the nearby sea. The man you are observing is a member of the sophisticated, urban, and literate patrician class that ruled these coastal city-states. He is likely dressed not in the simple hides of a hunter, but in fine imported cotton robes from India, and a small embroidered cap on his head. He is a Muslim, and his faith, along with his trade, connects him to a vast, cosmopolitan world that stretches all around the shores of the Indian Ocean. He is a true man of the world. He has likely traveled on the great sailing ships to the ports of Arabia, Persia, and perhaps even to the Malabar coast of India. He understands the complex web of global trade. He knows that the very elephant tusk he has just purchased will likely end its journey in a workshop in China, to be carved into a beautiful, intricate box for the daughter of a wealthy mandarin. He is a local African merchant, but he is thinking globally. His world is not the farm or the mine. It is the warehouse, the counting house, and the harbor. His most important skills are not in tracking an elephant or forging an iron hoe. His skills are in negotiation, in understanding the fluctuating values of different currencies and commodities, in speaking multiple languages, his native Bantu tongue, Kiswahili, the classical Arabic of his faith and of long-distance commerce, and most importantly, in reading the great, invisible map of the monsoon winds. His tools are not a pickaxe or a spear. His tools are a delicate set of bronze scales for weighing gold dust, a wooden abacus for calculating his profits, and a quill pen and a pot of ink. The Swahili were a literate culture. They used the Arabic script to write their own Bantu language. And a wealthy merchant like this one would have kept meticulous, detailed records of every transaction, every shipment, every debt owed and paid. The quiet, dry scratching of his pen on a piece of paper, recording the details of the gold he has just bought, is a sound as powerful in this world as the clang of a blacksmith's hammer was in the world of Great Zimbabwe. Historians debate the precise cultural and ethnic identity of this Swahili elite. To what extent did they see themselves as African? And to what extent did they identify as Arab or Shirazi, Persian, tracing their lineage back to the legendary traders who had first settled these coasts? The reality is that their identity was a unique and beautiful fusion of all these things. They were a cosmopolitan people, a product of the Indian Ocean itself, a bridge between continents. You look around his great, cool warehouse. It is a treasure chest of two worlds. On one side are the raw, powerful materials of Africa. The great, curving, creamy white elephant tusks stacked like firewood. The small, heavy, and unassuming leather bags that hold the glittering gold dust. There might also be bundles of animal hides, blocks of fragrant sandalwood, and perhaps the precious patterned shells of sea turtles that on the other side of the warehouse are the goods he will trade for this African wealth. These are the finished manufactured treasures from the great civilizations to the east. There are great stacks of brilliant blue and white porcelain ceramics from Ming Dynasty China. There are bolts of brightly colored, finely woven cotton cloth from India. And there are chests filled with the beautiful glazed pottery of Persia. The merchant's life is governed by the great, predictable, and utterly unstoppable rhythm of the monsoon winds. He has bought the gold and the ivory. Now he must wait. He must wait, perhaps for several months, for the seasonal winds to shift direction, to change from the winter monsoon that blows from the northeast to the summer monsoon that blows from the southwest. For it is those winds that will bring the great sailing ships, the dhows of Arabia and Persia, to his harbor. He is a patient man because the ocean has taught him that you cannot hurry the wind. And then one day the waiting is over. A lookout on the minaret of the city's mosque calls out. The first distinctive triangular lateen sail of a dhow has been spotted on the horizon. The fleet from the east has arrived. The arrival of the dhows from the north transforms the city of Sofala. The quiet period of waiting is over. The harbor, which had been sleepy for months, is now a bustling forest of tall, slender masts and complex rigging. The great stone warehouses are unbarred, and the quiet, intense, and deeply profitable business of international trade begins. Imagine you are standing on the busy docks. You watch as the Swahili merchant you have been observing directs his workers. They bring out the treasures of the African interior. They carry the great, heavy, curving elephant tusks, their creamy white surfaces glowing in the sun. They bring the small, but immensely heavy leather bags of pure gold dust. This is the raw, powerful, and natural wealth of a continent. And from the newly arrived ships, another kind of treasure is being unloaded. This is the finished, manufactured, and artistic wealth of the great civilizations of the East. You see workers carefully carrying fragile cargoes of brilliant blue and white porcelain bowls and vases, their surfaces painted with intricate designs of dragons and phoenixes. This is porcelain from the kilns of Ming Dynasty China, a technological and artistic marvel so fine and so durable it was considered almost magical, and was prized above all other ceramics by the wealthy elites of Africa and Europe. You see stacks of beautiful glazed earthenware from Persia, perhaps in a stunning turquoise color, or decorated with elegant, flowing Arabic calligraphy. And you see chests filled with thousands upon thousands of brightly colored glass beads, manufactured in the great workshops of Cambay in India. These beads, so common in their homeland, were a rare and highly sought-after luxury in the African interior, where they were used as a form of currency and a symbol of wealth and status. The Indian Ocean trade network of this period was a true and truly ancient global economy, and the physical evidence of this connection is undeniable. Archaeological excavations at the ruins of Great Zimbabwe itself have uncovered fragments of Chinese celadon ware, pieces of Persian pottery, and thousands of these Indian glass beads. providing a direct, tangible link between this remote, inland African kingdom and the great economic powers of Asia. It is a beautiful and profound exchange. The raw wealth of Africa, the gold from its earth, the ivory from its animals, is being traded for the manufactured artistic wealth of Asia. It is a meeting of two different worlds, two different kinds of treasure, here on this small sun-drenched strip of the African coast. The world was more connected than we often imagine. A piece of blue and white porcelain made by a potter in Jingdezhen, China, could travel on a great trading junk to a port in India, then be transferred to a dhow to sail to the coast of Africa, and then be carried on a man's head for hundreds of miles, to be used by a king in his great stone palace in Zimbabwe. It is a truly incredible journey. Historians often debate the balance of this trade. Was it a fair and equal exchange between sophisticated African kingdoms and Asian traders? Or was it an early form of an exploitative relationship, where the finite, raw, and irreplaceable resources of Africa were being exchanged for manufactured goods and trinkets, a pattern that would become much more pronounced and destructive in the later colonial eras? Our Swahili merchant is at the very center of this great web of commerce. He is the master of the transaction. He buys the gold and ivory low from the Shona porters of the interior, and he sells it high to the Arab and Persian captains of the dhows. In return, he buys the porcelain and beads low from the dhow captains, and sells them high to the porters who will carry them back to the interior. He is a middleman, a man who understands both worlds, and his profit from this trade is immense. It is this profit that has built his fine, multi-storied coral stone house, and the great mosques and palaces that make the Swahili city-states so magnificent. The trade is complete. The gold and ivory are now loaded into the holds of the great, ocean-going ships. They are about to begin the next long leg of their journey, a journey that will be powered not by human feet, but by the great, predictable, and invisible power of the monsoon winds. The trade is complete. The great warehouses of Sofala are empty of their African treasures, and are now being filled with the new goods brought from the east. And in the harbor, the final act of this great intercontinental exchange is about to begin. It is time to look at the magnificent and elegant ships that make this entire world possible. It is time to look at the dhows. Imagine you are standing on the shore as one of these beautiful, ocean-going vessels prepares to depart. It is a ship made of wood, its planks not held together with iron nails, but often sewn together with miles of tough coconut fiber rope. This ancient technique, used for centuries in the Indian Ocean, created a hull that was incredibly strong, yet flexible, allowing it to bend and move with the energy of the waves rather than breaking against them. But the true genius of the dhow is its sail. It is not the square sail you might see on a Viking longship or a Roman galley. It is a great triangular or lateen sail rigged to a long slanted yardarm. This simple, elegant design was a revolutionary piece of sailing technology. A square sail is only truly effective when the wind is coming from behind you, but the lateen sail allowed a skilled sailor to tack and sail much closer against the wind, making the dhow a far more versatile and maneuverable vessel, able to navigate the shifting winds of coastal waters and the vast emptiness of the open ocean. And the engine that powered this entire vast trade network was a natural one: the monsoon winds. The Indian Ocean has a unique and wonderfully predictable weather system. For 6 months of the year, from roughly November to February, the winter monsoon blows steadily and reliably from the northeast, from Arabia and India down towards the coast of Africa. And for the other 6 months, from April to September, the wind reverses, and the summer monsoon blows just as steadily from the southwest, from Africa back towards India and Arabia. This created a perfect, natural, and entirely free wind-powered highway. A merchant could leave his home port in the Persian Gulf, sail down to Sofala on the winter monsoon, spend a few months trading his goods for the gold and ivory of Zimbabwe, and then sail home on the summer monsoon. It was a system of beautiful, natural simplicity. There was no need for complex weather forecasting. You did not sail when you wanted to. You sailed when the wind told you to. The entire economy of half the world moved to the great, slow, and predictable rhythm of this oceanic breath, inhaling for 6 months and exhaling for 6 months. The sailors who crewed these dhows, the Arab and Swahili mariners, were some of the greatest navigators in the world. Like the Polynesian wayfinders of the Pacific, they used the stars to guide them across the open ocean. They developed their own sophisticated navigational instruments, like the camal, a simple but effective device for measuring the latitude of the stars, and they created vast, detailed written charts and sailing directions. Historians and nautical archaeologists still debate the precise origins of the dhow and its revolutionary lateen sail. Was the sail an Arab invention, born in the Red Sea or the Persian Gulf? Or was it adopted from even older Indian or Greco-Roman sailing traditions? Its origins are murky, but its perfection by the sailors of the Indian Ocean made it the dominant technology in these waters for more than 1,000 years. You watch as the dhow, its great triangular sail now full of the southwest monsoon wind, glides out of the harbor. In its hold is the gold that was dug from a dark mine on the Zimbabwean plateau, and the ivory that was taken from a great elephant on the savannah. It will sail north along the Swahili coast, perhaps stopping at other great ports like Kilwa and Mombasa, before beginning its long, open-water journey to the east. The gold that was panned from a stream by a Shona woman in the heart of Africa might now be melted down and minted into a coin in the markets of India, or used to create a delicate piece of jewelry for a princess in Delhi. The world, even in the 14th century, was a vast and surprisingly interconnected place, and the humble dhow was the thread that stitched it all together. We have now seen how the wealth of Great Zimbabwe was created, how it was carried to the sea, and how it was traded to the far corners of the world. But this golden age, this period of immense power and prosperity, could not last forever. Back on the high plateau, the great stone city, which seemed so permanent and so powerful, was about to begin its own slow and mysterious decline. The great dhows, laden with the gold and ivory of Africa, sail away into the sunrise, their destinations the fabled and wealthy ports of the East. But our story now turns back, away from the sea, and returns to the high inland plateau. We return to the great city of Zimbabwe. But it is the 15th century now. The golden age is ending. The city, which was once so vibrant and powerful, is beginning its slow, quiet, and mysterious decline. Why was this magnificent capital city, the center of a great empire, abandoned? This is the central mystery of Great Zimbabwe. There is no evidence of a great, destructive war or a city-sacking conquest. There are no signs of a catastrophic plague. The archaeological evidence suggests that the decline was a slow, gradual, and peaceful process. People simply, over the course of several generations, began to drift away, leaving the great stone walls to fall into a profound and enduring silence. One of the most compelling theories for this gradual exodus is a simple but powerful one. The empire may have been brought down by a desperate and chronic shortage of a single vital commodity. Not gold, but salt. It is a profound and telling irony. An empire that was famous throughout the known world for its almost unimaginable quantities of gold may have ultimately withered away due to a lack of the simple, common white rock that we take completely for granted. It shows that the true foundational wealth of a nation is not always in its dazzling luxuries, but in its humble necessities. As we have learned, salt is essential for the life of all mammals, for both humans and for the great herds of cattle that were the true, daily measure of a Shona family's wealth. But the high inland Zimbabwean plateau has no natural sources of salt. There are no rock salt deposits to be mined, no salt springs, and the sea is a journey of hundreds of miles away. Every single ounce of salt required by the 18,000 people and the tens of thousands of cattle of Great Zimbabwe had to be imported over very long distances. A reliable and constant supply of salt was, therefore, a matter of life and death, a strategic necessity. The trade routes that brought salt to the capital were just as important as the routes that carried gold out of it. The salt was carried by porters from the salt pans on the Indian Ocean coast, or from other great salt pans in the arid Kalahari Desert. far to the southwest. So what might have happened? The salt theory suggests that, for some reason, these vital trade routes may have been disrupted. Perhaps the rise of new, competing political powers in the region, which we will meet later, cut off Great Zimbabwe's access to the main salt sources. Or perhaps the sources themselves became less productive. Without a steady, reliable supply of salt, the health of both the people and, crucially, their all-important cattle herds would have begun to suffer. A kingdom whose wealth is measured in cattle cannot survive if its cattle are not healthy. Archaeologists and historians vigorously debate the salt theory as the primary cause for Great Zimbabwe's decline. Is it a compelling and logical explanation for why a massive population would gradually choose to move away from a specific site? Or is it an oversimplification, an attempt to find a single simple answer for what was likely a much more complex and interwoven set of problems? The evidence is a quiet one. There is no ancient inscription that reads, "We are leaving this magnificent city because we have run out of salt." The evidence is in the simple biological logic of survival. You can live without gold. You cannot live without salt. And neither can your cattle. A city of this immense size, with its huge population of humans and animals, would have placed an incredible and constant demand on its environment. And the lack of a single vital mineral may have been just one part of a larger, unfolding environmental crisis. After centuries of continuous, intensive settlement, the very land itself may have been growing tired. The kingdom's thirst for salt was likely just one symptom of a much larger and more complex problem. After 300 years of continuous, intensive settlement by a massive population, the great city of Zimbabwe was beginning to exhaust the generosity of the very land that had given it life. Imagine the immense ecological footprint of a pre-industrial city of nearly 20,000 people. The surrounding hills, which are now covered in a quiet, secondary growth forest, would have been almost completely stripped bare of trees. The people needed a vast and constant supply of timber for the wooden frames of their thousands of daga huts, for the stockades that surrounded their villages, and most voraciously of all, for firewood. They needed it for their daily cooking fires, and they needed immense quantities of it for the fire-setting process used in the gold mines and for the charcoal needed by the blacksmiths to forge their iron tools. At the same time, the vast herds of cattle, the symbol of the kingdom's wealth and the foundation of its social structure, would have been grazing on the surrounding grasslands. Year after year, tens of thousands of cattle would have slowly but surely stripped the land of its protective covering of grass, leading to the erosion of the precious topsoil during the seasonal rains. The farmers in the valley, meanwhile, were likely cultivating the same plots of land for generation after generation, slowly depleting the soil of its essential nutrients. It is a quiet, tragic story that has been repeated throughout human history, in every corner of the world. A great city, in its very success, becomes a victim of its own size. It is a living organism that simply grows too large and too hungry for its local environment to support. The very triumph of Great Zimbabwe may have contained the seeds of its own inevitable decline. Modern archaeological and environmental studies of the area support this theory. Scientific analysis of ancient pollen and sediment cores, taken from the soil around the ruins, shows clear evidence of significant deforestation and soil erosion that took place during the city's peak occupation, and to this growing internal man-made pressure was likely added a great external pressure from nature itself. The period of Great Zimbabwe's decline, in the 15th century, coincides with the change in the global climate. This was the beginning of the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling that, in southern Africa, may have translated into a long and devastating period of reduced rainfall and prolonged drought. For a civilization that was so skilled in managing stone and gold, they were entirely dependent on the whims of the sky for their water. The city's only major, reliable water source was a single sacred spring, located high up in the hill complex. This one spring had to provide the drinking water for thousands of people and their livestock. A few dry years in a row, and the entire magnificent city would have been in a state of profound and desperate crisis. Historians and climatologists still debate the precise timing and the ultimate impact of climate change on the fall of Great Zimbabwe. Was a great drought the single primary cause that forced the population to migrate away in search of greener pastures? Or was it more of a stress multiplier? A final terrible blow to a society that was already weakened by other factors, like resource depletion and shifting political dynamics. The abandonment of the city was likely not a single panicked event. It was not a desperate flight from a sudden catastrophe. It was a slow, rational, and multi-generational exodus. As the land grew tired, as the forests receded, as the harvests became less reliable and the grazing lands became poorer, life in the great capital would have become harder and harder. And so families and then entire clans would have simply made the logical decision to move away, to migrate north to new, more fertile lands with more reliable sources of water, salt, and pasture. There was likely no single moment when a king or a priest declared, "The city is over." It would have been a slow, quiet hollowing out. A few dozen huts are abandoned one year. A few hundred more are empty the next. The great city did not die in a single violent event. It just slowly and very quietly went to sleep. And this slow decline did not happen in a political vacuum. As the power of the great capital city began to wane, new, dynamic, and ambitious rival powers were beginning to rise in the surrounding regions, ready to take its place. The slow, quiet decline of Great Zimbabwe, likely driven by an exhausted and changing environment, did not happen in a political vacuum. A great power does not simply fade away without leaving a void. And into that void, new and ambitious powers began to rise. As the old capital grew weaker, its children, in a sense, began to leave home and to build their own new and powerful houses. The great Shona civilization that had built Great Zimbabwe did not collapse or disappear. Its center of power simply migrated. In the 15th century, as people began to drift away from the old capital, two powerful successor states emerged, founded by the very same people, who carried with them the traditions of stonework, of cattle herding, and of the great gold trade. To the north, in the rich and fertile valley of the great Zambezi River, the kingdom of Mutapa was born. According to the rich oral traditions of the Shona people, the kingdom's founder was a great prince from Zimbabwe named Nyat Simba Mutoda. He was a warrior and an explorer, who was sent north from the declining capital on a vital mission, to find a new reliable source of salt. He found it, and he also found a fertile land with a powerful river that could be used as a new highway for trade. And so he founded a new and powerful dynasty. The title of the kings of Mutapa was Mwene Mutapa, a phrase that the later Portuguese traders would mishear and turn into the legendary, almost mythical name, Mono Mutapa. It is a wonderful and telling detail from the oral histories. The great hero prince leaves the old, dying city not in search of more gold, but in search of simple, life-giving salt. It lends further weight to the theory that a shortage of this vital commodity was a key reason for the Great Migration to the southwest of Great Zimbabwe. Another powerful kingdom rose, centered on its new capital city of Kami. This was the home of the Torwa dynasty, and like their ancestors at Great Zimbabwe, they were master builders in stone. The ruins of Kami, which you can still visit today, are another magnificent testament to their skill. But the style is different. Instead of the high freestanding walls of Great Zimbabwe, the builders of Kami created their city on a series of beautifully decorated, terraced stone platforms built up along the side of a hill. It is a clear evolution in the architectural tradition that it is not a story of collapse, but a story of succession. The great fire of Great Zimbabwe did not go out. Its embers were simply carried on the wind to start new, bright fires in other parts of the land. The Shona civilization was not dying. It was evolving, expanding, and reorganizing itself. And as these new kingdoms rose, they naturally drew the all-important long-distance trade routes away from the old capital. The Swahili merchants on the coast, and the Arab and Persian dhow captains, were pragmatic businessmen. They would go wherever the gold and ivory were. As the new kingdoms of Mutapa and Kami consolidated their power and their control over new mining areas, the trade routes shifted to serve them. Great Zimbabwe was slowly but surely bypassed. Historians still debate the exact relationship between these new successor states and the old fading capital. Was it a clean and perhaps violent break, with new rival dynasties establishing completely independent kingdoms? Or did Great Zimbabwe, even as its population dwindled and its political power vanished, retain a kind of spiritual or ancestral importance for them? Was it still seen as the great ancient homeland, a place of pilgrimage and a connection to the ancestors, long after it had ceased to be the center of the world? The great city's purpose had been fulfilled. Its children had grown up and moved on to build their own houses and to seek their own fortunes. And now the great stone house of the ancestors could finally rest. Its long and magnificent work was done. It was ready to fall into a deep and centuries-long sleep. The new kingdoms of Mutapa and Kami are now thriving. Their own capital cities are growing, and their trade with the coast is flourishing. But for every new clay hut built in a new capital, a hut in the old capital, in Great Zimbabwe, falls quiet and its cooking fire goes cold. The great slow exodus is underway. The abandonment of this magnificent city was not a single dramatic event. There was no great catastrophe, no final bloody battle at its gates. The end of Great Zimbabwe was not a sudden death, but a long, slow, and gentle fading away. Imagine the process as it would have happened over the course of several generations in the 15th century. A family of farmers finds that their plot of land in the valley is no longer as fertile as it once was. They hear stories from a traveling trader of the rich, virgin soils in the north, in the new kingdom of Mutapa, and so they make the logical decision. They pack their few belongings, say their farewells, and they leave, walking towards a more hopeful future. A few years later, a master blacksmith, renowned for the quality of his iron hose, receives a generous offer from the king of Kami. He is offered a new workshop, a higher status, and more customers. And so, he too decides to leave the quiet, declining city for a new, more dynamic one. A young man, seeing little future in the old capital, decides to seek his fortune not as a farmer, but as a trader on the great Zambezi River, the new highway of commerce. One by one, family by family, clan by clan, the people of Great Zimbabwe simply drifted away. The archaeological evidence confirms this peaceful and gradual decline. There are no great layers of ash and destruction that would indicate a violent conquest. The layers of pottery, of tools, of daily life simply thin out, and then around the year 1450 they stop. This is perhaps the most unusual and poignant part of the city's story. Great cities usually end in fire, in flood, or in the fury of a conquering army. The city of Great Zimbabwe did not die with a bang. It died with a quiet, long, and drawn-out sigh. You can imagine the last king of Great Zimbabwe, ruling over a dwindling population from his magnificent stone palace. He would have been the custodian of a glorious and powerful past, but the future of his people was now happening elsewhere. He was the king of a magnificent and almost empty house. Even after the main political and commercial life of the city had ended, it is likely that the site was not completely abandoned. A small community of priests, the hereditary guardians of the sacred hill complex, probably remained for many generations, tending to the shrines and communicating with the spirits of the royal ancestors. Even in its death, the city was still a holy place, a place of memory. A few quiet curators remained, tending to the ghosts of the great kings and the silent stone walls, like the keepers of a vast, open-air museum. Archaeologists still debate the precise timeline of this abandonment. Did it happen over a rapid period of just 20 or 30 years, driven by a catastrophic drought? Or was it a much slower process, a gradual decline that lasted for over a century? The dating of the final layers of occupation is difficult, and the exact speed of the city's fading is still a subject of careful research. As the people left, nature began its slow and patient work of reclamation. Grass began to grow thick and tall in the great empty courtyards. The beautiful graphite-burnished pottery of the Shona people lay in broken shards on the floors of the empty huts. And the Daga walls of those thousands of huts, no longer maintained, began to soften and melt back into the earth during the heavy seasonal rains. The great city was slowly, quietly returning to the land from which it came. For the next 200 years, the great stone walls would sleep largely undisturbed, known and revered by the local people, but forgotten by the wider world. But the memory of its great wealth, the legend of a golden kingdom in the heart of Africa, would persist. And these rumors would eventually reach the ears of a new, and very different, kind of visitor to the African coast. The first explorers from Europe were arriving. The great city sleeps, hidden in the heart of the continent, its magnificent stone walls slowly being embraced by the patient, green growth of the savannah. But the world outside is changing, and it is changing with a stunning and violent speed. New ships, with different square-rigged sails and carrying different kinds of men, have rounded the southern tip of Africa and burst into the ancient, placid world of the Indian Ocean. These are the Portuguese caravels. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the Portuguese, with their superior firepower, systematically attacked and seized control of the wealthy Swahili city-states. They were astonished by the immense wealth of this trade network, and particularly by the sheer quantity of gold that was flowing out of the African interior from ports like Sofala. And they immediately became obsessed with a single question: where was it all coming from? The Swahili merchants and the local African traders, when questioned by these new, heavily armed European visitors, told them stories. They spoke of a great and powerful kingdom deep in the interior, ruled by a mighty king whose title was the Mwini Mutapa. And they told them rumors of a magnificent ancient city of stone, the source of this incredible wealth, a place they called in the local language Zimbabwe. These are the first European accounts of Great Zimbabwe. They come to us from the writings of 16th century Portuguese travelers and officials, men like João de Barros. But these accounts are not first-hand descriptions. They are a mixture of fact, rumor, and legend, stories told on the coast about a place none of these Europeans had ever actually seen. They describe a great mortarless stone fortress in the interior, a place of a powerful king and of the gold trade. Imagine a Portuguese captain in his hot, heavy steel armor, standing on the docks of Sofala, listening to the tales of a Swahili merchant. He is hearing for the first time about a civilization and a city that he cannot possibly comprehend. It is a moment of profound and deeply unequal cultural contact. The Portuguese accounts were often confused. By the time they arrived on the coast, Great Zimbabwe itself was already in decline or had been completely abandoned for decades. The main political power in the region was now the Kingdom of Mutapa, to the north. The Portuguese often conflated the two, believing that the current powerful king of Mutapa ruled from the ancient, magnificent city of Great Zimbabwe, even though the two were separate, if related, entities, and as the Portuguese tried to make sense of these stories, they interpreted them through the only lens they had: their own European Christian worldview. A great, ancient, stone-built city, a source of immense gold, in the heart of Africa? To them, this could only be one thing. It had to be the legendary land of Ophir, the biblical source of King Solomon's gold. The great stone enclosure must be a copy of King Solomon's temple, or the palace of the Queen of Sheba. This was the birth of the great colonial myth that would cloud the history of Great Zimbabwe for the next 400 years. They could not or would not imagine that this magnificent city was the work of the local African people. And so they searched for an explanation that fit their own world, and they turned the city into a story from their own holy book. It was an act of profound, and ultimately racist, historical misinterpretation. Historians still debate how much the Portuguese truly knew about the interior. Did any of their traders or missionaries ever actually see the ruins of Great Zimbabwe with their own eyes? While the Portuguese did establish trading posts and a military presence far up the Zambezi River, In the heart of the Matapa Kingdom, there is no definitive, first-hand account of a Portuguese visitor to the actual, abandoned city of Great Zimbabwe during this early period. Their knowledge remained a collection of second-hand rumors and biblical legends. Over the next few centuries, as the gold trade from the interior dwindled and the power of the Matapa Kingdom declined, the stories of the Great Stone City faded even further into myth. It became a kind of African El Dorado, a lost city of gold that many European mapmakers would place on their maps, but which no one seemed to be able to find. The city, which had once been the vibrant center of a great empire, had now become a ghost, a whisper on the wind, a half-remembered legend told by old traders in dusty port towns. Its true physical reality was forgotten by the outside world, waiting to be rediscovered. The great city sleeps for centuries, a silent, vine-covered ruin, its story preserved only in the deep, quiet memory of the local Shona people. And then, in the middle of the 19th century, during the great, arrogant, and violent scramble for Africa, a new kind of European arrives in this land. Not just the occasional trader, but hunters, prospectors, missionaries, and colonists. And in 1867, a German-American hunter named Adam Render stumbles upon the lost city. A few years later, in 1871, a German geologist named Karl Mach visits the site and publicizes its existence to a stunned and fascinated Western world. The rediscovery of Great Zimbabwe created a profound and deeply uncomfortable problem for the European colonial mindset. The prevailing ideology of the time was one of absolute and unquestionable racial superiority. The justification for the colonization of Africa was built on the racist belief that the indigenous African people were an inferior, uncivilized race, incapable of creating any great works of their own. And then, here in the middle of the land they were in the process of conquering, was this: a magnificent, sophisticated, and undeniably ancient city of stone. It did not fit their story, contradicted their entire worldview. And so, rather than change their racist beliefs to fit the evidence, they decided to change the evidence to fit their beliefs. This was the beginning of the great colonial myth-making of Great Zimbabwe. If indigenous Africans were incapable of building such a place, then it must, they reasoned, have been built by someone else. A superior non-African race must have come here in ancient times. And so the European writers and amateur antiquarians began to invent a new, false history for the city. Karl Mach himself, the man who publicized the ruins, was the first to champion the idea that this was the biblical land of Ophir, and that the great stone enclosure was a copy of King Solomon's temple, built for the Queen of Sheba. Others, ignoring all evidence, claimed it must have been built by the ancient Phoenicians, the great sailors of the Mediterranean. Still others argued for an ancient Arab or Egyptian origin. The logic was a twisted, self-serving, and circular one. Africans are an uncivilized people, which is why it is our moral duty to rule over them. But here stands a great and civilized city. Therefore, it could not possibly have been built by Africans. It must have been built by a superior, non-African race from the distant past. The ruins became a mirror, and in them, the colonists saw only a distorted reflection of their own prejudices. This myth was not just a harmless fantasy. It had deeply destructive consequences. When the British colonial administrator Cecil Rhodes and his British South Africa Company colonized the territory in the 1890s, they officially sponsored and promoted this false history. The first archaeologist sent to investigate the site was a man named Richard Hall. But Hall was not a scientist. He was a firm believer in the non-African origin theory, and in his obsessive quest to find evidence for his ideas, he deliberately destroyed the very history he was supposed to be preserving. Convinced that the layers of occupation containing the artifacts of the Shona people were just the filth and decadence of later squatters, he had several feet of the precious archaeological deposits systematically removed and thrown away. It was an act of historical vandalism on a catastrophic scale. The truth, however, was already being uncovered by real scientists. The first proper, professional archaeological investigation of the site was conducted in 1905 by a British archaeologist named David Randall Mackiver. He was followed in 1929 by another brilliant archaeologist, Gertrude Cotton Thompson. Both were meticulous scientific excavators, and both came to the same definitive conclusion. The ruins were medieval in date, not ancient, and all the artifacts found within them were unquestionably of indigenous, African origin, but a lie that serves the powerful can be a very difficult thing to kill. Despite the overwhelming scientific evidence, the colonial government of what was then called Rhodesia continued to promote the myth of a foreign origin for Great Zimbabwe. It was the official history taught in their schools for the next 50 years, but even as the colonial mythmakers were trying to erase the true history of the city, the most powerful and iconic symbols of its real African origins were being unearthed from the ruins. Even as the colonial mythmakers were working to erase the city's true history, the city itself was beginning to offer up its most powerful and iconic secrets. From the deep, sacred earth of the eastern enclosure on the hill complex, the first of the great Zimbabwe birds were unearthed. Imagine you are there at the moment of their discovery. A worker's shovel strikes a piece of carved stone. The earth is carefully brushed away, and a strange, majestic, and utterly unique work of art emerges into the sunlight for the first time in centuries. There are 8 of these birds in total, each one carved from a single piece of soft gray-green soapstone. They are not realistic portraits of any single, identifiable bird. They are powerful, stylized, and deeply symbolic creatures, a unique fusion of the avian and the human. They have the powerful bodies and talons of a bird of prey, perhaps a battler eagle, a bird of great spiritual importance in Shona culture. But some have human-like features like toes instead of talons, or even lips instead of a beak. Each bird is perched atop a tall stone monolith, a silent guardian looking out over the world. Like the conical tower, the birds are a beautiful and silent mystery. They are clearly objects of immense religious and political significance, but the precise details of their story, the specific myths they represent, the songs that were sung to them, and the rituals that were performed before them, have all been lost to the great silence of time. They are a symbol whose key has been misplaced. The most widely accepted theory is that the birds were the emblems of the ruling Shona dynasty, each one perhaps representing the spirit of a different deceased king. In Shona spirituality, the eagle was seen as a messenger, a creature that could fly high into the heavens and communicate with the great god, Mwari, and then return to earth with messages for the king. These birds then were the sacred ancestral link between the living king and the spirit world, the guardians of the nation. The story of the birds after their rediscovery is a sad and telling chapter in the colonial history of Africa. These objects, the most powerful and direct proof of the city's indigenous African origins, were not kept in the land of their creation. The great colonial magnate Cecil Rhodes, whose company was ruling the territory, was fascinated by them. He took several of the birds for himself. Over the years they were scattered. 5 of them were taken to his house in Cape Town, South Africa. One was sold to a museum in Berlin. They became symbols of the colonial appropriation of African cultural heritage. The very objects that proved the genius of the Shona civilization were taken away from the descendants of the people who had carved them. The journey to bring the birds home would take almost a century. After Zimbabwe gained its independence in 1980, the new government began a long and difficult process of cultural repatriation. One by one, the birds have slowly been returned to their homeland. The final bird was returned from South Africa in 2003. It was a moment of immense national and cultural significance, the reclaiming of a stolen soul. Art historians still debate the unique artistic style of the birds. Are they a purely indigenous, local Shona artistic expression, born from the unique cosmology of this one place? Or do they show any subtle artistic influences from the cultures of the Swahili coast, or from even further afield, a sign of the cosmopolitan, interconnected nature of the great Zimbabwe state? Today, one of these 8 birds has become the preeminent national symbol of the modern country of Zimbabwe. Its graceful, powerful silhouette is on the nation's flag, on its coins and banknotes, on the official seal of its government. It is a beautiful and powerful story of survival. An ancient, sacred object, created by an anonymous Shona artist nearly 1,000 years ago to represent the spirit of his king, was buried, unearthed, stolen, lived in exile for a century, and has now finally returned home to become the very face of a modern African nation. The bird has outlasted all the empires and all the myths, and along with the return of the birds, the truth of the city's origins has been restored. The patient scientific work of honest archaeologists has finally and definitively silenced the colonial mythmakers. The great stone city has been given back its true history. The return of the sacred birds was the final, symbolic act in a long and difficult struggle. It was a struggle fought not with swords and spears, but with the patient, methodical tools of science and evidence against the loud, confident assertions of prejudice and myth. The true story of Great Zimbabwe could now, at last, be told and fully embraced. The scientific case had been closed for decades. The pioneering female archaeologist Gertrude Cotton Thompson, after her meticulous excavations in 1929, had declared with a certainty that infuriated the colonial establishment that the ruins were unquestionably Bantu in origin. She had found no shred of evidence for a foreign influence, and every single object, from the pottery to the ironwork, was consistent with the local Shona culture. The truth was there, in the quiet scientific record, waiting for the political reality to catch up. And in 1980 it finally did. When the colonial state of Rhodesia, after a long and bitter war of liberation, became the new independent nation of Zimbabwe, it took its very name from this ancient city. The great stone ruins became the ultimate symbol of a new, post-colonial African identity. It was a powerful declaration to the world that the history of this land did not begin with the arrival of European colonists, but that its roots were deep in the ancient, powerful, and sophisticated soil of Africa itself. Today, Great Zimbabwe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a place of immense pride for the Zimbabwean people, and a destination for travelers from all over the world who come to marvel at its scale and its beauty. Archaeologists continue to work at the site, using new, non-invasive technologies like ground-penetrating radar to map the structures that still lie buried, hoping to understand more about the daily life of the city without disturbing the sacred ground. The debate is no longer about who built this place. The debate now is about the finer details of how they lived, how they worshipped, and how they organized their great society. And so, our journey through time comes to an end. We are back in the present day, standing in the quiet, sun-warmed city of stone. The great mysteries are not all solved. The true purpose of the conical tower, the precise meaning of the soapstone birds, these are secrets that the silent stones may never fully give up. But the central mystery, the one that clouded the site for so long, has been resolved. You are not standing in the ruins of some lost, foreign colony. You are standing in the proud and magnificent capital of a great African kingdom. The silence that surrounds you is no longer one of emptiness, but one of quiet, patient, and enduring dignity. And as you stand there, in the warm golden light of the late afternoon, with the soft wind whispering through the tall grass and the silent stone corridors, our long and quiet story comes to its peaceful end. The memory of the miners in their dark shafts, the sound of the merchants in the bustling port of Sofala, the sight of the magnificent dhows on the monsoon winds, and the quiet, mysterious dignity of the stone birds, all of these can now begin to soften and fade, like the details of a half-remembered dream. The story is complete. The city is at peace. Its true history is now known and honored. There is nothing left to resolve. There is only the quiet that comes at the end of a long journey. And now you can rest.